Hello and welcome to Women in Post, a podcast and web series for women in post-production by Women in Post-Production. Today on the show, we'll be speaking with Caitlin.
It is kind of a controversial genre because it's putting this stuff on TV, kind of glorifying the wrong aspects of humanity.
So where did your interest in post come from?
I started to gravitate towards editing really young. When I was, I think, a junior in high school, I took an independent study with the photography teacher there, and she was able to get an educational copy of Final Cut for me. And I started to teach myself Final Cut back then. But at the time when I was going into college, I still thought that I wanted to work in production. I was really interested in special effects makeup specifically. And I thought that I wanted to do that. But when I went to Emerson and I started going on student film shoots, I learned very quickly that I don't really like being on set. I don't like the hurry up and wait of it, is what they call it. Is like, okay, it's a mad rush to get something done in 20, 30 minutes, and then you have nothing to do for 4 hours. And I just started thinking about, my work life and, if I'm going to be putting in long hours somewhere, I want to be able to be doing something the entire time. So I kind of very quickly gravitated towards editing exclusively after that.
Mm-hmm. Now, for somebody who has maybe never been on set before, like, what's happening during the wait time?
Not a whole lot.
Like, why is everybody waiting?
Everyone is waiting because there are a myriad of reasons. They could be setting up the next shot. They might have to put a new reel of film in the camera if they're shooting on film, which I'm old enough that we usually still were at that point, even though it was a student production. Yeah, there's any number of reasons where you have to wait for them to be ready to start filming again. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can take a really long time. So as a makeup person, once I had a cast member ready to go, then I was just kind of waiting until someone needed a touch up, or I had to get someone ready for a new scene or something like that. And it just wasn't active enough for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So you started in post in college?
I did. Yeah. Whenever I had to do group projects, I always tried to take the editor role. I would get pushed into doing other things sometimes, but I never enjoyed it as much. And then I had the great benefit and privilege of being from New York City. So during the summer, I started doing internships also really early on. Like, I think the first one I got was after my sophomore year. And that was a post-production house who initially brought me on for free, but eventually started paying me, which was very kind. And I did several more at small kind of micro budget documentary companies. Mm-hmm. And that's what got me gravitating towards documentary and unscripted work as well.
And I did a little snooping into your background. So you made a big move from New York to California, right?
Yeah, I moved here about 4 years ago. It was kind of a decision between my husband and I. He's an assistant editor. And, I love New York. I'm always going to love New York. I'm from there. And I probably never would have come out here without him. But our thinking was, this is a much bigger pond in terms of the kinds of opportunities that are available, just because there's so much more work happening here and so many different types of projects happening here. And, we were at a stage in our life where we didn't have any children or a mortgage, or, there was nothing really keeping us in one place. And we decided, if we're going to try this ever, we should do it now. And it's worked out. I mean, we've both had some really great opportunities here after we got over the initial hump of having to kind of regenerate a work network and like not really knowing anybody or having anything lined up in advance. Mm-hmm. So once we got over that, we've been very fortunate to be pretty successful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does the feel inside of an editing room feel different in California as compared to New York, or is it pretty much the same?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure the culture in the room is different, but I hope I don't offend anyone by saying this. I think people appreciate the East Coast work ethic. I think East Coast people are a little more aggressive and driven. I definitely had to get used to not being in a hurry all the time when I initially moved out here. I would say I kind of have felt that the gender discrimination is a little worse out here, probably because the industry is a lot older and kind of more set in its ways out here. Mm-hmm. Whereas New York always felt kind of DIY a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah. I used to work in the Fed, so like those roots are ancient. And yeah. It's like, you're familiar with the myth of Sisyphus?
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like, always trying to push that boulder uphill and you never get very far because it's just such an old culture.
Yeah. Some things out here are definitely better though. Like, I also feel like my craft is much more respected, and little things like people value like the lunch hour more out here. Whereas like in New York, if you actually left the office for a full hour, I think people would kind of look at you sideways. So there are small things like that, but it's kind of pros and cons on both sides.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you plan on staying in California?
I'm not sure. We're definitely going to be here a couple more years, but it's a tough call. It's actually something that we talk about a lot because, we work jobs that sort of confine us to working in one of the two most expensive cities in the whole country. And even though, we've been able to work steadily and make pretty good money, there are like other life goals that seem kind of impossible to achieve because the cost of living is so high. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
That makes sense. So, okay. So you are in the unique perspective that you and your husband work in post-production. Like, you're the first person I've ever talked to that had that situation. So like, what does it feel like? I mean, do you guys compete with each other? Do you feel like one career is more like easy to pursue than the other person's career? Like, how does that feel?
Well, we actually met on a job when we were kids. I mean, it was like my second job out of college, but we've actually never worked together since, for whatever reason. He's an assistant editor and his skill set is probably much more in demand. Like it's much harder to find a really strong assistant editor than it is to find a strong editor. I don't know why that is, but especially now that everything's digital, the assistants have become much more technical than creative. Like when I was trying to move up from AE to editor, I still got a lot of kind of junior level editing opportunities from the editors that I was working with. And I kind of feel bad for the assistants that are trying to make the jump now, because I just feel like those opportunities have kind of gone away because so much of their day-to-day responsibilities are purely technical.
Is it like organizing footage and things like that?
Yeah, in unscripted, it's a lot of like syncing the cameras with the audio, syncing and grouping.
Mhm.
And, because everything is on digital cards now, it's like you're doing so much more media management. Whereas, when I was training, and this isn't even that long ago, I mean, this is less than a decade ago, we were still just putting tapes into a machine,
Mhm.
So the landscape is just so much different.
Mhm. You have been on so many different shows.
Yeah, the bulk of my resume has ended up being kind of in the true crime space. And that's because one of the earliest paying jobs I got was on a show called The First 48, which has been on, I think, over 20 years now. It's kind of crazy that it's still on. But it's a kind of a very straight up verite docu-follow show where they follow homicide detectives.
Like real homicide detectives?
Yeah, for
Wow.
the first 48 hours of their investigation. Basically, the whole premise of the show is if they don't get a lead within the first 48 hours, the odds of them ever solving the crime are cut in half. So I started working there when I was very young. I think I was 22 or 23 years old. And I was really fortunate because it was one of the few unscripted, unionized jobs in New York City. So, I got union benefits, I had health insurance, and the office culture there, they also really focused on promoting people from within. So I almost ended up getting fast tracked. I was just super focused and I worked really hard, and I was able to rise from basically digitizer to editor within 4 years. Like I was editing by 26, which is really unusual. And I kind of hung out there continuing to edit for another about year and a half until I kind of felt really confident and comfortable and also kind of ready to flex my muscles on other things. But because I worked in that space for so long, a lot of the jobs that I got after that kind of ended up still being in the true crime genre, which is fine. I mean, I enjoy it, but my mom always jokes that like, can't you work on something where nobody dies once in a while? like when I got the house hunter's job, I was there for about 9 months. Which is really, really great as well. And, you can't have a further departure like genre wise.
No.
Because it's like this nice, happy thing of, these couples mostly buying a house for the first time. So that was a nice little break
Well,
from the death.
Apology about that. I mean, like, what is it like to sit and we all know how much time it takes to edit something. And you're sitting there and you're absorbing this content about pretty much horrible things, right? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of toll did that take on you?
It's only really gotten to me a couple of times. One time I was working on a show about the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. And we got one of the things that we had access to was the body cam footage of the first responders who were like going into this club and trying to get people out, after this horrible mass shooting had occurred. And that material really stuck with me for a long time. And there have been like a handful of other cases I've had to deal with where stuff has kind of really stayed with me. But I think that there's some sociological value to kind of examining that stuff. I mean, it is kind of a controversial genre because, there are plenty of think pieces out there about, is putting this stuff on TV kind of glorifying the wrong aspects of humanity? Like, are we glamorizing murderers too much? Or like in the case of the First 48, that show would occasionally get a lot of flack for just kind of the racial politics that are inextractable from everyday police work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely complicated. But at the end of the day, I still think that there is merit to documenting that side of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time where you've been called into, like, say, to testify in court based on like the footage that because you pretty much become an expert, right, in the things that you're cutting together? Has that ever happened?
Yeah, I basically feel like I could never serve on a jury ever again. But a lot of the time we would actually, when stuff was still on tape, once an episode was locked, we would actually destroy the footage, specifically to avoid just constantly getting bogged down with subpoenas.
Really?
Yeah.
So are you destroying not original footage, right? Just the footage that was supplied to you?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
We were only receiving copies from the police department. So
okay.
I don't mean to say that any of that stuff got destroyed, but only stuff that the production company was filming for the purposes of the show would get destroyed.
Okay. That makes sense. Because, I mean, you guys have a job to do and it doesn't involve going to court. Like, that would suck, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Has that ever gotten you out of having to do like jury duty?
I've never, even though I've gotten called a couple of times, I've never gotten to the questioning phase.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do kind of wait for the day where that becomes irrelevant.
Oh man, I got to go to jury duty too. They have you sit down and they're going through trying to decide who they're going to pick. And they ran out of time and never got to me. And I was so upset because I really wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And nobody else wanted to be there. And like, I just really wanted to. And
I wish you could volunteer, like, especially as a freelancer, where my schedule fluctuates all the time and I occasionally have downtime. I would love to just be able to go like, all right, like, I'm available now. Like, let's do it now. Like, don't call me in the middle of a show.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of these like hardcore, maybe not hardcore, but like intense shows. And you're part of the union, right? And so is there any like services, any support that you get from the union, like because of the type of content that you're working in? And if not, should there be services like that?
That's an interesting question also. They do occasionally hold kind of mental wellness workshops, not specifically tailored to, people working in true crime, but just everyday operations of post, no matter what you're working on, can be a real grind. I mean, you're often sitting in a room by yourself for 10 hours a day in the dark, with no windows. It can be really hard to kind of stay healthy and make sure you're moving enough. So the union does kind of occasionally hold workshops about wellness and time and stress management. And they'll occasionally bring in people kind of like life coaches to help with, kind of the stresses of it.
Mm-hmm. When you left the First 48 and went to House Hunters, was that by choice or was there like a need there that prompted that move?
Well, those two things weren't close together. I had done a couple shows in between and made the move from New York to LA in between.
Okay.
But I always have to actively try to diversify my resume because it is so easy to just get pigeonholed into doing the same kind of show over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am actively looking for work, I always try to apply to types of things that I haven't done before. It can be really hard to be considered for that stuff in the first place, but as long as the job post doesn't exclusively say like, only apply if you've worked on a male skewing fishing adventure show before, which is like not an exaggeration. As long as they don't say like, specifically say like, don't bother me unless you have these credits, like I'll usually give it a shot because you never know.
Mm-hmm. Does it really require that big of a difference in people to work on one kind of show as compared to another?
Well, that's the kind of the great frustration, right? Is the skill set that you're using is the same. As an editor, your job is to have a really great sense of emotion and tension and figuring out what the right mood is when you're selecting music, and all of the tools in your toolkit are the same. You're picking out the clearest lines of dialogue that tell the story. You're picking out the best reaction shots that are generating the kind of emotion that you're looking for. But I think stuff just moves so fast and no one really wants to take a lot of risks on who they bring in for things just because there's not a lot of time to have a learning curve. So that's why it can be hard to break out. But as someone who can be looking for a job, it can definitely get frustrating. Like the Bravo credits thing is like a big kind of inside joke in the post community because every Bravo show is like only apply if you already have Bravo credits, right? Because they're kind of notoriously difficult to work for because they just give ridiculous amounts of notes. And apparently they're very harsh in their notes. So they kind of only ever want to hire people that have done that before. And it's like, well, shouldn't you guys just keep like a Rolodex of editors that have like already worked on Bravo shows and just save everyone a lot of time?
So have you worked for Bravo?
I have not, and I don't really want to. It sounds terrible.
All right, well, let's take a look at the clip that you sent over. I'm going to share the screen here.
These crimes are unique. Murders committed by siblings.
It took the two twins together to create this evil pact.
He and his brother gravitate and feed off of one another.
How could he even think that he could talk his sister into doing this? And she did it.
I don't think it mattered what home they came from or what neighborhood they were raised in. These people were psychotic.
The Stovall brothers,
The Bondurant Twins,
the Carr brothers, the Gustafson siblings. There was no doubt in my mind they would have shot me.
She did not deserve what she got.
You just want to tell the victims that they're not forgotten.
After all the brutality, there was a golden ray of light.
Her surviving was the thing they didn't count on.
We couldn't help it. We didn't want to be there.
The people with the best motive had the best alibi. The puzzle pieces started coming together.
They ended up getting life in prison plus 896 years.
We needed to get them off the street or someone else was going to die.
Siblings who kill. There's a special place in hell for them.
So is this a real, like a true crime sort of show, or is this kind of fictional?
Yeah, all the stories are real. And each episode talks about one case, basically. So that was the trailer for season 1, which premiered last October. We did 10 episodes. And that was the bulk of my year last year. I worked on that show from April to November. And it was my first time being a lead. editor as well. So it was kind of a big deal for me. And I didn't actually cut that trailer because I'm very resistant to doing anything that's like very flashy. It's just not my style. So teasers and things usually get thrown to somebody else. But I did work on all 10 episodes of the season as the lead. I ended up finishing most of them, and I'm pretty proud of the final product. And we're getting a second season, which will be starting in the spring. So I'm looking forward to going back to that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yes, they're all real. All the stories are real.
Okay. You just said something interesting, which is like flashy isn't your style, so you don't do teasers. Never heard that before. Like, I didn't realize that would be an option for an editor. Like, it doesn't everybody have to produce the most flashy, appealing content possible? Like,
well, you can't always opt out. And, you know, part of being a good editor at the end of the day is being able to adapt to what people are asking for, whether it's the producer or the network. Ultimately, you have to deliver what they want. But it's just not my natural inclination. Like, I tend to lean very subtle. A lot of the notes, my typical notes are that something is either too subtle or too smart. And I kind of have to make things a little more heavy-handed.
What does too smart mean?
I don't know.
So subtle would be like something that's just more like fluid, less jump cut?
I mean, sound design is probably the easiest example. You know, usually especially in documentary, unscripted reality storytelling, you always want to kind of use your sound design almost as punctuation. Mm. So if something important has just happened, you probably want to add a hit or a sting, and accompanied, you know, paired with a reaction shot, usually, to kind of emphasize it. And I, left to my own devices, I usually go with just the more subtle options, you know, just the stuff that's not as loud or not as in your face. Mm-hmm. I guess I trust the audience more than the average network executive.
Well, I feel like that's an interesting like idea. And that sounds really attractive to me personally. Just I have 2 kids; they're young, and we have those muffs that you put on their ears to kind of cancel sound, because they both kind of entered the stage where like all of this music, especially when they go to like school or to an event, everything is so loud and like trying to get your attention that it's overstimulating. Like it's too much. So you. And I don't want to assume, but it sounds like you like to provide content that doesn't like put everything in your face all the time.
Yeah, I just don't like to like beat people over the head with things. You know, I think most people are smarter than we give them credit for. And especially when they're tuning into a story, you know, as long as it's told well and it's told clearly, they don't need to really be told like when they should be reacting to things.
Mm-hmm. I'm not ever pumping in the laughter from who knows where. Do they still do those in shows?
Laugh tracks? Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if you watch any like, I mean, Big Bang Theory just ended, but stuff like the old like Chuck Lorre like multicam sitcoms, they definitely still there's laugh track happening there.
I need to put a laugh track in right now, like in the podcast. We'll do that in post-production.
Yeah. So
you're working Fine Young Criminals.
Yes, that was that show was kind of a lighter flavor of true crime. Like there weren't really any murders happening. But each episode was about a person or group of people who were committing crimes in their teen years, and kind of the arc of each episode would be how they've kind of turned their lives around since. But it was mostly like money-making schemes. It wasn't anything too gory. Mm-hmm. And I actually worked on that show in Atlanta with probably one of the best crews that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Everyone was just super pleasant and had a great sense of humor and was good at their job, which is like the Venn diagram of those things usually do not intersect that much. And that was for Vice. And it was the first time that Vice was hiring a third-party production company to produce a show for them instead of doing it internally. Even though we finished it in March of last year, it still hasn't aired, which is really frustrating because it's probably one of the best things I've ever done. They gave us a lot of creative freedom editorially, and we all just had just so much fun with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was also a 10-episode season, and episodes 3 and 10, I ended up cutting probably 90% by myself, just because of how the schedule shook out. And then I also had hands on a bunch of others. But yeah, I loved it. I hope it sees the light of day someday because it's a really fun show.
Yeah. Why would they pay everybody to make it and then not put it on the air?
Well, of course, at the time that we were in post, Vice was going through a lot of kind of financial turmoil. They were restructuring. They got a new CEO. They laid off 20% of their staff. So I kind of have the suspicion that they're maybe shopping it around to other platforms and trying to sell it. But I can't say for sure. I don't have an inside hook on that, unfortunately. So
that's interesting. So this sounds like there's multiple ways for companies like that to make money.
Yeah.
So what is the typical turnaround time between when something is shot, when you edit it, and then it goes on TV?
Oh man. It can vary a lot. I would say most edit schedules for an unscripted kind of docu-series, like the stuff that I'm mostly doing now, is anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks. And it can really depend. Either everything will be shot in advance, or you're starting out with partial footage, and especially if there's recreations involved, we'll usually focus on getting the story chunked out first, and then based on, kind of the paper edit, then they'll base what they're going to shoot, which recreations they're going to shoot, and what they're going to look like off of that, off of the version of the story that we've decided to tell. And then, sometimes you have to get pickups or additional interviews. So that stuff will come in later. It really depends. It's really a case-by-case situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I guess that is a big difference between scripted and unscripted. You're literally entering into a project and you don't know exactly what the arc is going to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I really fell in love with doing documentary and unscripted is, I feel like, especially more so in LA than New York, a lot of people I work with secretly want to switch to scripted. That's kind of always seen as the best you can do, the highest you can go. And I'm really happy doing what I'm doing because I love crafting the story in the editing room. Like I kind of love the puzzle aspect of it, and the fact that it's a much more writerly position than if you were working on something that was scripted, and really your job boils down to selecting the best take of a performance. I mean, not to like oversimplify, but the role is very, very different.
When you're setting out to find that arc, do you find like the capstone piece and say, okay, this is where I'm going, and just make everything work from there? What is the way that you work through the footage?
If I'm given enough time, I really like to watch everything. And, whether you're an editor or a story producer, you have to have a really, really sharp mind when it comes to details. And, I don't want to say I have a photographic memory, but I'm one of those people that can see or hear something once, and I can kind of store it away and remember that it's there, and if I need to go back to it, I'm like, I know this exists, and then I can find it again. So I prefer, as long as I have the time, to kind of absorb everything that I have as a whole, and then it's kind of a process of just whittling away down to the best parts that tell the story that you want to tell most clearly.
That's really interesting that you bring up the memory thing. Do you feel like just personally, like I feel like I have that same kind of memory when it comes to video footage and audio, and like where I place my keys when I come in the room. But I have a horrible like actual memory. Like I can't remember what I did last week, and I can't like envision what my goals for the next, what life is going to look like 10 years from now. I have no idea. And there's a word for that. There's like when you can't create pictures in your mind. I forget what it's called. But so what other ways does your mind work that maybe, is unique to you finding your role as an editor?
And the attention to detail is a big part of it. Having a being able to kind of read people's faces, and because in unscripted you end up repurposing things a lot, and it all boils down to like very Eisenstein montage theory practices. When you're looking at someone's face in a moment of reality, you have to be able to judge, whether the expression on their face is going to read the way that you want it to read for the story, the type of story that you're telling, right? So being able to pick up on those kinds of nuances is really important. I feel like I am only organized within my Avid projects. Like my bins and my sequences are the only area of my life where I am like a super neat person. But it's really, really important when you're sharing edits, which is more and more common, just because, we always have less and less time to do things. I've worked with editors where, you open up their sequence and you can't make heads or tails of it. Like there's just no way that a person who doesn't have that brain could kind of dissect what's happening there. And that makes it really difficult, if you've been saddled with doing notes on someone else's edit, which is something that happens all the time. So yeah, I always like to keep my sequences and my bins just like super clean and organized. when I was leading for the first time last year, I was in charge of, how the projects were getting organized and kind of leading people through how to share their edits and stuff. And the analogy that I kept throwing to was like, if you got hit by a truck, right? And, if something were to happen where you would never be able to come back to the office and work on this again, like somebody else needs to be able to know where your most recent work is and, be able to take it apart if they need to and do notes on it. Mm-hmm. But, when you're working with a variety of creative personalities, there's an equally wide variety of how organized people are.
I would love to see just like a screenshot of your filing, like your system inside Avid.
Yeah. I mean, I've had other editors like basically crib my system. I wish I had a screen grab of that for you. I might be able to find a document that I made when we were setting up Killer Siblings last year and email that to you.
Maybe what is like an ABC, do this, do this, do this for your file structure that you always do?
The name of the game is duplication for me. I mean, I think when you're sharing an edit, the first thing that you should do every day, like as soon as you get into the office before you do anything, is duplicate the sequence, put yesterday's sequence into an old bin, and then, update the new sequence with today's date and your initials. So that way, people always know this is the last time it was worked on and this is who worked on it. Mm-hmm. So, if there's any questions, you're able to go to that person and say, can you help me figure this out?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh man, I want to go in. That's one thing. When I have like 10 of these episodes recorded, right? And I haven't edited any of them. Well, I started now, but I hadn't edited any of them. And I had this really scary moment when I thought that I had lost like half of the footage, right? So I found it and then immediately had to clean out my hard drive and like get everything super organized. It was like, okay, This is never going to happen again. Probably deleted like 2 terabytes worth of stuff. I'm not kidding. Like there's a fine line, right, between being like a footage pack rat and like an archivist of like a responsible archivist.
Yeah, I also never throw anything out. So
how do you do that? Like do you just always buying extra hard drives? Do you trust the cloud? Like, oh my gosh. Oh man.
Yeah, it can occasionally be a problem, like especially if a project file is getting too large and it takes 15 minutes just to open it. Mm-hmm. That's the point where you probably have to take your old bins and your old sequences and store them in maybe like just a backup project. But I still would never delete anything because you really never know when the network is going to be like, just go back to the way this scene was cut before, and maybe that was months ago, and you want to be able to pull that up rather than having to try to recreate it from memory.
Oh yeah, oh my gosh, that'd be a nightmare. So what is maybe like the hardest thing that you ever had to do in your career or like in an edit?
I'm having a pretty hard time at the job I'm doing right now, which I won't name, but a lot of what I really struggle with is generated from working, having to work with other people. And you're dealing with a lot of different personalities, and the show that I'm working on right now particularly has a lot of kind of male egos swirling around and competing with each other. And it results in a lot of what I call manufactured chaos. You know, like things don't have to be as difficult as they are, but because there's so much mismanagement at the top, all that stuff kind of trickles down to make our jobs a lot harder than they need to be. You know, like I've been in situations in the last couple of weeks where it's like, okay, we need you to do notes on 2 acts in 3 hours because we're going to screen this with the owners of the company and, you know, it has to look perfect. Like that, creating a situation like that is just a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not to say that, you know, it's funny. Someone just shared a meme on like one of my groups on Facebook. And it said something like, you know, when I said I could work under pressure, I didn't mean that I would kill myself for your company, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like I can get things done in a stressful environment and I can get them done quickly, but I also don't appreciate like being set up to fail.
Right.
Which, you know, when just impossible situations like these are generated because of a lack of planning or just poor management, getting blamed for stuff, you know, that is not your fault is always difficult.
Yeah.
So running into situations like that has always been the hardest part of the job for me.
Is that really prevalent, you think, in the industry?
It can be. You know, I've worked with, like I said, some really, really wonderful teams, and then I've worked with, or even one-on-one, like I've worked with some really wonderful people, and then I've worked with some really, really difficult people. Mm-hmm. And you really never know like how it's going to go. But yeah. I mean, it's a toss-up. You never know what you're going to get. It can be great. It can be terrible. It can be, you know, somewhere in between.
Well, it's good that you can recognize that, though, like that if you're in a bad situation and they're telling you like, hey, this is your fault, or hey, you need to do this, or like at least that you can recognize that it's not you, it's them. Like I remember there was one of the first jobs I took after college. I remember going to this guy's office, and it was in the legal field serving summons, and it's just kind of like a bad job in the first place. Who wants to do that? In the interview, he literally said, like, I need you to know that in this office, like, shit rolls downhill, and I need to know if you can handle it. And I said, yes. Like, of course. I said, well, I think I said, I don't understand what you mean, but absolutely I can handle anything. Because I thought, like, I was a big deal, and nobody ever treated me poorly, and I had no idea what it was in for. And it was the worst career experience of my life. Mm-hmm. Right? And I wound up, like, I think I quit the day, I think it was Christmas Day, because he made me come in and work on Christmas Day. Wow. And it was devastating internally, because like I thought it was me. I didn't have the context to realize that this was this guy, and like I was allowing myself to be in that position. So yeah, I had to have responsibility for myself, but at the same time, like it's not you that creates that hostile environment. Yeah. I think a lot of people need to realize that, you know?
Yeah, especially younger people who, you know, just have less experience to base, you know, their decisions off of. I mean, I've definitely when I was younger, I worked for some people who were just like flat out emotionally abusive people. But I didn't kind of have the work experience to recognize the situation that I was in at the time. But, you know, being older now and having worked in a lot more different types of situations, now I'm much better at kind of seeing it. And you definitely do have to be comfortable with standing up for yourself and advocating for yourself, because there are plenty of people out there who will take advantage and kind of just push you as far as you're willing to go, to the point of, compromising your own health and safety. And an important realization to make as well is, like, at the end of the day, it's a stupid TV show. Like this is something that someone is going to put on while they're eating dinner or washing the dishes and kind of pay half attention to. And that doesn't mean that it's not important or that you're not providing enjoyment and entertainment and, learning opportunities for an audience. But it's just not worth killing yourself over.
So what is maybe one or two ways that if somebody's in that situation right now and they've never been through this before, like what can they do to stand up for themselves or to protect themselves?
I would say be really mindful of your hours, especially. Just don't give a company free work. And you just have to be good about verbalizing, like if you're given a task saying like, this is how long this is going to take me. And, that's the way it is. And, if you feel like you're under a lot of pressure to stay later than you want to stay, or, anything that you don't want to do or is really compromising to you as a person. There's one side where you always want to be a team player and, do what's best for the show. And there's the other side where, you also don't want to let yourself be taken advantage of, because it hurts everybody. Not only does it hurt you, but it also kind of sets the precedent for what the people above you are going to expect from, future people that are going to be in your position down the road, So it's kind of hard to get into the specifics of what to do exactly, but I would just say, your health always comes first, and that includes your mental health. Don't give up free work. You work the hours that you're paid to work, and that's it. Because when you volunteer your time, it hurts everybody. And I don't know, it's really hard to have those skills without just having the experience and having to learn a lot of things the hard way, unfortunately. Like I've finally learned not to take stuff personally, which I feel like as a creative person is especially difficult. But don't take notes personally. I've worked with producers who try to kind of like filter notes so that they don't sound as harsh coming straight from the network. And I always tell them, like, just forward me the email. Like, just let me see the notes unfiltered, because then I can actually do a better job of interpreting what it is that this person is actually asking for. And, the fact that they might be saying it in like a very mean way, you can't let that get to you, because they don't know you from Adam. They're just watching a QuickTime on their phone probably. And, having gut reactions to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it has nothing to do with you. And you just have to, try to do your best to rise above that stuff. Not to say that, you should minimize your own feelings or be dismissive of your own stress level. But it's just so many times, more often than not, it's not personal. That's all I mean to say, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's kind of like last week when I was procrastinating on a project, I commented on a friend's Facebook political post, expressed a political opinion, and somebody was like, that's an idiotic idea. And I got super mad at my friend for not defending me to this person I don't even know.
Yeah.
It sounds like that, but except you can't unfriend a network. You can't have to go to bed when it's bedtime and wake up in the morning and feel better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I kept you we're already 11 minutes over. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about while we're still on here?
I guess I would also say that if you're in the beginnings of your career and you're just starting out, I guess just know that most people are willing to help you. And, don't be shy about kind of reaching out and asking for help. Don't send someone a cold email who you don't know from Adam and ask them for a job. That's not what I mean. But, most people are willing to have conversations with you and let you kind of learn from them, whether it's just a coffee date or being able to sit in their edit bay or, whatever it might look like, because everyone had to start somewhere, and most people remember that. Some people are forgotten, but most people remember, what it was like to start. So just don't be afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And what are you looking forward to? Maybe the next steps in your career?
I'm really looking forward to Killer Siblings season 2. Now that we kind of know what the network wants, the second season should go a lot smoother than the first season. And I'm just really excited to take it to the next level and also, have the opportunity to lead a team again. That was a really great learning experience for me. So that should start in the next, hopefully 6 weeks or so. So I'm excited to go back to that. And then beyond that, my aspirations are just to continue to do unscripted work and docuseries work, but just kind of raising the bar on the type of project that I get to do. I would love to do something that's kind of higher profile, whether it's I really love a lot of the series that Netflix has been putting out lately. I'm always looking to step outside the true crime genre and kind of flex my muscles there. Yeah, that's kind of
mm-hmm.
That's kind of it. That's very, very broad, but yeah.
Nice. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I feel like I learned a lot. I hope other people have learned a lot, and really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was nice.
Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this week's episode, give us a like, leave us a question or comment, and share with your friends. Your viewership and support helps promote women working in film. Follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube, and join our Patreon community. Interested in being a guest or sponsor on the show? Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. See you next week on Women in Post.